looking for a tarot deck that is great for shadow work and provides interesting intuitive readings, I have found that the Hush Tarot by Jeremy Hush is perfect for just that reason, and in this video I'm going to give you everything you need to know about the Hush Tarot deck, so let's have a look. So the Hush Tarot has been inspired by Victorian botanical art, and it has a slight creepy undertone which you will see in the flip through that's about to follow. But before we dive into the flip through, comment below if you work with shadow decks or you're about to start your shadow deck journey. Now, in the introduction, Jeremy Hush has this to say about his deck. The creation of this tarot deck has been a lifelong odyssey of personal experiences. Hush Tarot represents the spectre of dreams, a destination without end, a compilation of creativity and personal inspiration. Much of my life has been spent on the move. While my surroundings have changed, I have always maintained a special kinship with animals, and I have carried an unbroken connection with the pen in my hand. My art is my world, and my world depicts nature as bigger than any individual person, where the smallest creatures look down on us. It's a place that feels like home, but still has an element of danger, adventure, and mystery. The element of mystery has drawn me to the tarot, with its unknown origins and its depths of symbolism and hidden meanings. Yet the cards can speak to absolutely anyone in a very personal way. In Hush Tarot, my characters are always on a journey. They appear lost in the weeds, but there is always a hidden clue guiding them to the way out. There is meaning in the direction they walk and an expectation for every turned glance. I'm hoping my creativity will inspire readers to follow their own imagination and lead more productive and creative lives. Hush Tarot weaves the lives of animals and humans together on common ground and equal footing. The animal and human spirit are unified. The idea of spirit animals figures significantly in this deck. They act as guides that we all relate to. The smallest creatures can have the largest impact. The greatest question can be answered by the slightest shift in perspective. Tarot is a piece of history that has endured through the ages. As the world grew and changed, tarot has survived and has been interpreted by artists of all kinds. It has been a lifelong dream of mine to be part of this legacy. So originally I said this about this deck. I was always in two minds about getting this deck. The reason I wanted it was because so this has also got a lot of animals and nature, but it's kind of the darker side of nature, the bits that we want to sweep under the carpet. It's quite macabre, it's quite creepy. I quite like creepy, macabre things. But since doing that video, I have realised that I was drawn to this deck for more reasons than I first thought. Many of the images depict almost like decay of the human as nature starts to take over and the humans surrender to this process. So there's lots of images of kind of twines and leaves growing, sort of entangling themselves around figures, or growing out of things like skulls, which interestingly is the underlying theme of the book that I'm currently rereading at the moment, Area X, or the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer, who is an author that is really interested in this idea of nature taking over, and I realised that I too am slightly fascinated by this theme. I find myself, particularly when I'm doing journal work, returning to these recurring images of particularly ivy for some reason, sort of growing into cracks of walls or growing over figures like Jeremy Hush has done in some of his card designs. And I realised that the reason I kept coming back to this deck before I bought it, I think there's something about those images that resonate with me. It has this underlying feel of sort of rewilding, and whether it's the sort of visual metaphors of rewilding of the human spirit, I suspect there probably is. Well, that's what I get from it. But if you've got something else from it, let me know down below. Also, from childhood, I've always had this fascination with the Victorian era, and I think that sort of Victorian aesthetic also called me to this deck. So if you think that slightly sickly sepia colours, and just the way that they created their images, it's a style probably that I would never do myself, but it's something that I definitely appreciate. And as I've said many times on this channel, when I choose a deck, it's often because of the style of the artwork, or it's something about the artwork that has initially caught my attention. And if you do the same, then please comment below what styles of art in decks do catch your attention. I'd love to know, and maybe I'll find other decks that I've yet to discover. As you may have noticed, the images are very different to a typical Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And if you have been struggling with this deck or wondering how you might use it, I will share with you later on in the video suggestions of ways you can connect with this deck in a more meaningful way. Another thing you may have noticed about this deck is that some of the images seem a little bit blurred, and I can only think that this is just the process of transferring a hand-created image through painting into a digital format. And perhaps this blurriness occurred because the images weren't photographed at a high resolution and therefore pixelated, or it could be something to do with the way the images have actually been printed. And whilst this could be annoying for some, for me this is quite a minor thing, and I think the images are still good enough to enjoy and appreciate the artwork. So this is a US Games publication, and as you can see it comes in a nice sturdy rigid box with a lid. We have a wraparound design all the way around the box depicting various details from some of the cards. Here the design on the back of the cards, and then we open it up, we get our book and the cards themselves. No ribbon or anything to help you lift the cards or the books out. You get a proper book, slightly better quality than some of the little white books that you get with some decks. It is on the slim side. So the front of the book is just a design taken from one of the cards and and again they've blended it with the design on the back like they did with the front of the box here. And the back has the skull detail from the card. As you will see, it's just writing in here. There aren't any images to accompany the meanings like you get, say, in a rock pool deck. But there are a couple of images at the back. When we look at the descriptions, we'll see that they are a little bit brief, but you get an introduction where Jeremy Hush talks about his inspiration for the deck, and then we go straight in to the descriptions. So without major cards, we get an upright meaning, and he talks about some of the symbols in the card, and then we get a reversed meaning as well. However, when we come to the minor cards, you'll see that the description is much reduced. You do get some keywords to sum up the overall energy of the card. You get a little bit more about the upright meaning, and again some keywords for the reversed, but a much smaller meaning. At the back there is some suggestions for spreads. I haven't actually used this spread, not that I'm aware of. So this one's called the Self-Binding Influence, which talks about energies, just the one spread, and then a little bit about Jeremy Hush, who created the images and, as I believe, wrote the descriptions as well. I got to mention that you have a notes section, although to be honest I think I'd probably just stick to using my own tarot journal. So the cardstock is okay, there is a slight gloss or sheen, but I would say these were probably more of like a semi-gloss. As I said, this is the back design, which is mirrored, so for those of you that do reversals, it gives you that option. The cards, I would say, are not too thin or not too thick. They're a nice medium thickness, which makes them quite nice to handle. Although I found when I'm shuffling them, they can get a little bit slippy. In terms of hand over hand shuffling, they're absolutely fine. And actually you can see with the thickness of the cards here, it doesn't give you too much bulk. So compared to this other deck, which is a Hay House publication, and the cards are a bit thicker, you can see actually the effect of thicker cards have over the whole width of a deck. And as I've mentioned, because of my small hands, this is actually much easier for me to manage. So yeah, as you can see, they glide quite nicely for hand over hand shuffling. I won't talk about riffle shuffling because I can't do it, but I suspect these will be sturdy enough yet flexible enough to do riffle shuffling for those of you that do riffle shuffling. If you do use riffle shuffling and you've tried it with this deck, comment below so other viewers will know how you have found that experience. Now, something else I just wanted to point out is the symbol to the sword and the wand. Now, it might just be me not paying attention, but for me these symbols look really similar, and when I first started using this deck I was getting a little bit confused because obviously they both have similar shapes to them. So that was just a bit of a bugbearer for me. I have got used to it now, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. So what is this deck really like to use in your readings? Well, I'm not gonna lie, I did struggle when I first used this deck, which was a real disappointment because I had anticipated it and I was really looking forward to using it. And because I struggled, I did go back and read some reviews. I looked on Amazon just because it was the easiest thing to look at the time, and whilst this deck had lots and lots of positive 4 and 5 star reviews, people absolutely loving the artwork, when you go down to the lower reviews from sort of 3 onwards, there were quite a few comments that echoed each other, people saying that it wasn't that close to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Some people felt that Jeremy Hush had almost just picked images and tried to get a best fit with some of the meanings of the tarot and not really connected the images to the artwork. Now, I don't know whether that's a fair comment, because if you read the little book, it doesn't say anywhere in there that this is a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, although I do suspect it probably uses Rider-Waite as its main source. And so in that respect, one could argue that maybe he could have put a bit more time and effort to make sure that there was a really strong connection between the descriptions in the book and the images that he'd selected for each card. Other reviews mentioned that with the minor Arcana cards, he hadn't incorporated the suits in a lot of the cards, and you'll have to go back and watch the flip through to see if you agree with that. Some of them do, some of them don't, and you know, that might bother some people. It doesn't particularly bother me, but I think if you're a real traditional tarot reader, then that might be an issue, not to have those suits as a visual prompt to remind you of the card's meaning. Now, whether this is Rider-Waite-Smith or not, the comments I'm about to say might be a bit unfair, but I've got to agree with some of these reviews because some of the descriptions do feel like a little bit of a tenuous link, because there are really interesting details within the overall design of the cards which aren't mentioned in the book. And I'll just give you an example of a card that I had in a recent reading with this deck, which is the 8 of Cups. So we have this rather dominating owl, and then we have this female character here who's looks like she's putting on a like a raven head or something, and there are some sort of biggish ants going on here. So when I had this in my reading, obviously I noticed the owl, but I felt that this was quite symbolic here, the woman putting on this raven mask, and yet in the description it doesn't mention anything about it. 8 of Cups, keywords escape and transition. The owl encourages us to look forward to new situations. Inspiration can be found in leaving the chaos of a current situation for a new, deeper spiritual goal elsewhere. The owl's solitude comes from its freedom to move on when needed. And it gets to the bottom of the page, so I thought, oh, maybe there's a bit more information here. And it goes straight on to reversed, which is hopelessness. Fear of pursuing new options has you in a stagnant state, which, I don't know, I found it quite intriguing that he'd, you know, got this quite interesting detail of this woman putting on the raven's head and yet not referenced it in the book. And I feel like it's almost a missed opportunity, in addition to maybe not including simple things like the suits for the suit cards. Jeremy Hush has also chosen some quite interesting images to interpret some of the other cards. So with the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith card for the star, we have very clearly a star up here, and the whole point of this card is that it's showing hope and guidance after the turbulence and destruction caused by the card before the Tower. It's interesting then that Jeremy chose not to incorporate a star. Instead, he's decided to use the flowers growing up through the skull and the decay as a symbolism of hope and moving on from life's challenges. And right or wrong, I actually think that's quite an interesting interpretation. But I think if you're still quite new to tarot, or you're very much versed in the more traditional interpretations, decks that are very closely linked to Rider-Waite-Smith, then I think, like I found, you might find this deck a bit of a challenge. However, does that mean that this is not a worthwhile deck? And let me know what you think. Put some comments below. Having come back to this deck after a time of not using it, I have grown to really love this deck. And I think I said originally when I did a shorter review on this deck shortly after getting it that I thought it was going to be more of an intuitive deck. I still feel like that. And if you've been struggling with this deck, I would encourage you to persevere with it, because I think it does give quite different readings, and it does, as you might expect with a more shadowy deck, it does encourage you to sort of look below the surface and have a little look at what's going on underneath. Speaking of using the deck intuitively, one of the other reviews I read, someone did acknowledge that even though it's not your typical Rider-Waite-Smith deck, it could be used more like an oracle deck. And obviously oracle decks, they don't follow a set format like tarot does. I don't know whether that's a negative thing or a positive thing. I mean, obviously with tarot you kind of want to use that universal language that tarot has, but personally I don't think there's anything wrong with straying away from that. And if it ends up being more of an oracle deck style reading, as long as you're getting something out of it and you're getting meaning from it, I don't really see the problem with that. What I have found is that I've got the best insight from this deck using a 3-card spread, and something I've been trialing recently is something I actually, a spread that I stole from Tarot Tats and Tea, another YouTube channel on here, who introduced me to the concept of just doing a 3-card pull for at the beginning of the day to see how the day is going to pan out. And I've honestly found that a really useful way of doing it. I kind of stopped doing 3-card spreads because I sort of struggled a little bit with the typical past, present, future readings. Then I went to just 1-card daily readings, which were insightful. But since I've started doing the 3-card pull, I found that my understanding of the day has been a lot more enriched when you get a message from 3 cards rather than 1. So I'd say with any deck that you're struggling with, you probably do this anyway, so I might be talking to the converted, but if you're new to tarot and you're looking for tips and tricks, yes, sometimes 3 cards seems a little bit more effort, particularly if you're short on time, but I really am valuing doing a 3 card spread with no particular question, but just kind of guidance for what the day is going to present to me, or a message that I might need to hear. So that might be one way that you can connect with the Hush Tarot a little bit more. Another thing that I have been doing is actually pairing this deck with an oracle deck. And because we're in the season of Samhain, of course, I have been pairing it with Season of the Witch, the Samhain Oracle, and I found that these 2 decks have worked really well together. So obviously you get the more in-depth input from the 3 cards from Hush Tarot, but then the Samhain card, I use it as like a summary. I really have found each time that the card from this deck has been like a final statement to sum up what the Hush Tarot cards have been saying to me. Just to put that into context with a reading that I have done with the Hush Tarot, and I've done quite a few over the last couple of weeks, combined with the Samhain Oracle. When I do a reading, I always try and do a visual interpretation first before looking at the meanings anyway, but I think, as I said, this is going to be more of an intuitive deck for me, so I think more and more I'm probably not going to rely on the meanings as much, and I know many of you don't. I pulled the 10 of Wands, the 2 of Wands, and the 8 of Cups, which is the card that I showed you earlier, and I did a visual description of what I could see, and I just write down whatever I see, whether it makes sense or not. And then what I try to do, and this is quite new to my tarot practice, is to write a summary statement of just intuitively what I think this spread is telling me. And I wrote, this reading is about being at a crossroads and knowing when to move, which direction to go, and the inner knowledge I need to have to guide me intuitively. It was quite interesting as my sort of summary card from the Samhain deck to pull the reflection card, which is indicating that it is time to reflect and be honest with myself. What is stopping me reaching my goals? Which really did support this idea of being at a bit of a crossroads. So if you've never tried combining a tarot and oracle deck before, they really can work well together. And it's definitely something that I've sort of played with, but I think it's going to be something that's going to be in my practice more and more. You could probably use any Season of the Witch oracle decks with the Hush Tarot, because I think they all have a similar vibe, although I suspect the more wintry ones might work better because they're more shadowy. Another deck I'm considering using is MJ Cullinane's Urban Crow Oracle. I'm also considering using Wild Woman Oracle. Another thing that I'm going to try with this deck is to pay more attention to some of the recurring themes and symbols that Jeremy has embedded throughout this deck, and just a few examples here. So the first one, I mean, I mentioned in the 8 of Cups there was the woman who was putting on the raven's head, and whether he's mentioned it in the book or not, I think if that image means something to you, you can then take ownership of that and use it within your reading. So there's quite a few here. So the Queen of Swords has got her raven mask at the ready, as has Temperance, and then obviously this one again. And having reread his introduction where he talks about the importance of animal guides, I think that's really shed a whole new light on this deck, which I'd sort of missed initially when I got that. So, you know, if you think about crows and ravens, quite often linked with the underworld, you have the connection to Odin and this idea of collecting information and intuition. So it may be, if you are going to use this deck intuitively, you can start picking up on subtle clues within these cards. Another thing that's reoccurred quite a lot is birds with keys in there. And again, regardless of traditional tarot or what Jeremy Hush has actually written in his description, you could take that idea and apply it as a symbol that could mean something to you personally. And if you do decide to do that, please write in the comments below. And I think this deck is going to need another review, and once I've experimented with that, I will definitely let you know how I got on with that. I really appreciate you joining me today for my full review on Jeremy Hush's Hush Tarot. If you found that review useful, then I would love it if you gave it a like, and if you like watching tarot related content, then consider subscribing to my channel for future videos. As always, if I've said anything that resonated with you, then pop a comment below. I love to read your thoughts. They always help me grow with my own tarot journey, and I'm sure if you've commented it will help somebody else too. This is my channel, Vaudeville Manor, House of Art and Tarot, and I'm Sally. Until the next video, bye bye.